When news reached Europe in the autumn of 1187 of Saladin's victory and the fall of Jerusalem, the Christian world experienced such a shock as it had never imagined in its wildest nightmares. The catastrophe of the Battle of Hattin and the loss of the Holy City, however, gave birth not only to mourning, but also to such determination as had never before awakened in Christian kings. 3 crowned heads, the world's most powerful rulers, vowed to personally lead their armies to the Holy Land to reclaim what Saladin had taken from them. This campaign was not merely a military undertaking, it was the greatest trial in the history of Christianity. In the battles of the Third Crusade, such epic duels unfolded that forever changed the face of the medieval world. Here, under the blazing sun of the Middle East, not just 2 religions, but 2 civilizations clashed, and on both sides stood leaders whose names are still the stuff of legends today. The dramatic prelude of departure. The war preparations themselves were epic. Holy Roman Emperor Frederick I Barbarossa, the 70-year-old veteran who had already participated in the Second Crusade, gathered together a massive army. According to sources, 100,000 men. This was the largest Crusader army ever assembled, which set out in 1189 through the Balkans toward Asia Minor. Meanwhile, French King Philip II and English King Richard I, who were otherwise mortal enemies over Normandy, were forced reluctantly to form an alliance. Both knew that neither could alone take on Saladin's unified empire, but their cooperation was fraught with tensions from the beginning. However, tragedy struck at the very outset. Emperor Barbarossa drowned on June 10, 1190, in the Saleph River in Asia Minor, when his horse stumbled and the water swept him away in his heavy armor. News of his death was so devastating to the German army that from the 100,000-strong multitude, barely 5,000 reached the Holy Land. The rest turned homeward or joined other armies. But Barbarossa's tragedy was only the prelude to the epic drama that unfolded in the Holy Land. When Richard and Philip finally arrived, they found a battlefield where Saladin had been preparing for the decisive confrontation for 2 years, the siege of Acre, 2 years of desperation and hope. The first great battle was not really a true battle at all, but a siege that lasted 2 years and brought all participants to the brink of desperation. King Guy de Lusignan of Jerusalem began the siege of Acre in August 1189. Guy, whom Saladin had graciously released after Hattin, was compelled to prove himself worthy of his crown. But this siege soon became hell for both sides. Saladin deployed a massive army behind Acre to relieve the city. The result was a situation that contemporary chroniclers called a double siege. The Crusaders besieged Acre, while Saladin besieged them. The sources paint a captivating picture of these 2 years. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir described the situation thus: the Christians were in the position of roasted grain between 2 sides of fire. Before them the walls of Acre, behind them Saladin's swords, and yet they persevered for 2 years in this hellish situation. The Crusader camp went through terrible suffering. Diseases, primarily dysentery, killed soldiers en masse. According to sources, there were so many dead that they could not bury them, and the stench of corpses pervaded the camp all winter. Queen Sibylla herself, Guy's wife, died in the epidemic along with her small children. But the situation was no easier on the Muslim side. Saladin was forced to maintain a huge army, which continuously cost money. The Sultan complained in his own documents that the treasury is exhausted and the people are weary from the long war. The breakthrough only came in June 1191, when English King Richard arrived. According to contemporary sources, Richard's arrival had such an effect on the Crusader camp as when the sun rises in the dark night. The English king immediately set about organizing the siege. Richard's genius showed itself in that he recognized Acre cannot be taken by conventional means. The city walls were too strong, and Saladin could continuously send supplies by sea. Therefore, Richard applied a new tactic. He had massive siege engines built, and, what was even more important, he personally participated in the dangerous undermining. The contemporary Itinerarium Regis Ricardi describes it thus: King Richard worked in the undermining with such zeal as a simple craftsman. He carried stones with his own hands, while Muslim arrows whistled over his head. And when his soldiers saw their king working, they threw themselves into the work with such enthusiasm that even Saladin marveled at it. On the evening of July 11th, Acre's captain raised a white flag. The city fell. The conditions were harsh: 200,000 Byzantine ransom, the return of the relic of the Holy Cross, and the release of 1,400 Christian prisoners. The members of the Muslim garrison were kept as hostages until the conditions were fulfilled. But Richard's decision to execute all Muslim hostages on August 20th, more than 2,700 people, including women and children, forever overshadowed this victory. The reason for the execution was that Saladin had not precisely kept to the agreement's conditions. This act deeply outraged the Muslim world, and Saladin vowed that he would never again be so merciful to the Crusaders. The Battle of Arsuf, Richard's tactical masterpiece. After taking Acre, Richard made a bold decision. He would march south along the coast to capture Jaffa, then turn from there against Jerusalem. This plan seemed logical, but Saladin knew precisely that here was the opportunity to defeat Richard. Contemporary sources describe this tension-filled march in detail. At the end of August, Richard's army set out from Acre. The organization was brilliant. They marched with the sea to their right, thus keeping one side protected. Knights went in the vanguard, then the infantry, finally the rear guard with the most valuable baggage. But Saladin was not idle either. His light cavalry attacked the Crusader column daily, not to fight a decisive battle, but to exhaust and demoralize the enemy. This tactic almost worked. According to Arab sources, the condition of the Crusaders grew worse day by day. The heavily armored knights suffered in the blazing heat, and their horses continuously fell under Muslim arrows. The Franks advanced like wounded wild animals, wrote Ibn al-Athir. The decisive battle took place on September 7th near Arsuf. This battle showed Richard's tactical genius in its full extent. The Crusader army numbered about 20,000, while Saladin's was 25,000. But numbers don't mean everything in medieval warfare. Richard created a brilliant formation. He placed the knights behind the protective wall of infantry and issued a strict command that no one should attack without signal. This required incredible discipline because the knights had been taught their entire lives to charge immediately when they saw an enemy. The battle began at dawn and lasted all morning. Saladin's troops attacked the Crusader formation in waves, but could not break through the infantry wall. The Muslim archers shot thousands of their arrows, but the Crusader armor held. The turning point came when the Hospitallers, who formed the rear guard, could no longer bear the continuous attacks. Garnier de Naplouse, the Hospitaller Grand Master, drew his sword and cried out, "In the name of St. George, we can bear no more," and he charged Saladin's right wing. Richard saw that here was the opportunity. The contemporary itinerarium describes the decisive moment thus. At King Richard's mighty voice, the entire Crusader army broke out in a terrible war cry and rushed upon Saladin's army with such force as when a massive rockfall thunders down a mountainside. The Muslim army could not withstand this coordinated attack. According to sources, 7,000 Muslims fell in the battle, while the Crusaders lost only 700 men. 32 Muslim emirs died, including most of Saladin's closest advisors. But what was even more important, the battle's moral effect was enormous. The Muslim army, which had seemed invincible since Hattin, suffered a heavy defeat. Saladin did not emerge from his tent for 3 days. According to a contemporary Arab source, the Sultan looked like one who had died 100 years ago. Richard, however, remained disciplined even after victory. He did not pursue the retreating enemy, but continued his original plan. He captured Jaffa and made it a fortress, the Jerusalem dream and bitter reality. After Arsuf, it seemed that everything was possible for Richard. The coastal cities surrendered one by one, Crusader morale reached the stars, and Jerusalem lay at their feet. But here Richard faced a decision that determined the fate of the entire campaign. In the winter of 1191, Richard twice set out against Jerusalem and both times turned back when he was already before the city walls. The reasons for the decision are revealed to us in detail by contemporary sources. First, Richard knew that even if he captured Jerusalem, he could not hold it. The city was located in the mountains, far from the sea, so it would have been difficult to supply. Moreover, Saladin's army, though broken, still existed and could easily have surrounded the city. Second, the Crusader army was beginning to disintegrate. French King Philip had already returned home. Many French knights followed him. The German contingent was also diminishing after Barbarossa's death. Richard saw that if he now captured Jerusalem, but then he too had to leave, the city would soon again fall into Saladin's hands. According to sources, Richard then wrote to his brother Prince John, "I would rather have never seen the holy city than to have seen it but not be able to hold it. My heart breaks, but my mind tells me to turn our backs to it." The Battle of Jaffa, the last great duel. By the summer of 1192, it was clear that the Third Crusade was over. Richard was preparing to return home. Saladin was also exhausted from the long war. But neither wanted to make peace in a way that would make them appear weak. And then occurred the last, perhaps most dramatic battle, the Battle of Jaffa. The situation began to escalate at the end of July. Richard began withdrawing his forces to Acre, where he wanted to load them onto his ships. Saladin saw that this was the last opportunity for a decisive blow. On July 27th, he appeared with a massive army under the walls of Jaffa. Jaffa was defended only by a small garrison consisting of sick and wounded soldiers. However, the strategic importance of the city was enormous. This was Richard's most important stronghold. From here he could communicate with Europe, and here supply shipments arrived. Saladin knew this and threw all his strength into it. According to sources, they broke through the walls within 3 days. By July 30th, the city had fallen. Only the citadel held out. The garrison commander desperately sent word to Richard in Acre. What happened next is one of the most fantastic episodes in medieval military history. Richard, when he learned of the attack, acted immediately. He loaded merely 55 knights, a few hundred infantry, and 2,000 Genoese and Pisan crossbowmen onto 7 ships and sailed south. On August 1st, when they arrived before Jaffa, the situation seemed hopeless. Muslim flags flew on the walls. Saladin's troops stood in masses on the shore. At first glance, Richard thought he had arrived too late, but then a Crusader priest jumped from the citadel and swam toward Richard's ship. "It's not too late yet, my king," he shouted. "The citadel still stands, and if you come now, you can save the city." Richard's reaction became legendary. According to contemporary sources, the king grabbed an axe, hung a shield over his shoulder, and throwing himself into the water, began swimming toward the shore. At this sight, the other soldiers followed him. What happened next was like a heroic epic. Richard, who alone charged forward into the enemy crowd, caused such panic among Saladin's soldiers that they began to flee. Even Muslim sources acknowledge, "When Malik al-Inqatar, Richard, appeared with his sword, our soldiers thought that a massive Crusader army was arriving and began to flee." The recapture of the city took a few hours. Richard personally killed several Muslim emirs and advanced so quickly that his own men could barely follow. By evening, Jaffa was again in Crusader hands, while Saladin's army fled 5 miles from the city. The final dance, August 5th. But Saladin did not give up. On the night of August 4th, he prepared for another attack. Intelligence reported to him that Richard had only few men and was waiting for larger Crusader reinforcements from the north. The Sultan decided to assault Richard's camp at dawn before the expected reinforcements could arrive. This was Saladin's last risky attempt. The dawn of August 5th offered an extraordinary sight. According to contemporary Arab sources, the Sultan deployed 7,000 cavalry and twice as many infantry. Richard, however, had only 77 knights, of whom only 18 were equipped with horses, and 2,000 crossbowmen. Richard presented another tactical masterpiece. He placed the infantry and dismounted knights behind a hedge, with spears pointing toward the ground. He mixed crossbowmen among them so they could shoot constantly. The mounted knights he kept behind himself as reserve. When Saladin attacked, Richard's men held their ground. Muslim cavalry poured upon them wave after wave, but could not break through the infantry's hedgehog formation. The crossbowmen systematically shot down the Muslim horses, and when a Muslim soldier dismounted from his horse, one of Richard's knights would run forward and spear him. The battle reached its climax in the midday hours. Saladin launched a general assault that deployed all his forces. But Richard had an answer for this too. He personally led his cavalry in a lightning counterattack that scattered the Muslim central assault. According to contemporary sources, Richard fought personally in the first line. An Arab witness, Baha al-Din, described it thus: "I saw King Richard charge alone into 30 Muslim knights. Not one of them dared face him. He was like fire that consumes everything that comes in his path." By afternoon, Saladin was forced to admit defeat. The Muslim army morally collapsed. Commanders openly rebelled. One emir said to the Sultan's face, "Your Mamluks, who robbed and killed on the day of Jaffa's fall, tell them to attack now." The peace negotiations and the end of war. After the Battle of Jaffa, both sides knew the war was over. Richard had proven he was capable of defeating Saladin, but he also saw that he did not have enough men to hold the Holy Land. Saladin recognized that Richard's commanders were far better prepared than his own. On September 2nd, they signed the peace treaty in Jaffa. The main points of the Treaty of Jaffa: the Crusaders could keep the coast between Tyre and Jaffa. Ascalon's walls must be demolished and the city returned to Saladin. Christian pilgrims could freely visit Jerusalem. A 3-year truce takes effect. Richard left the Holy Land on October 9th. When the ship sailed from Acre's harbor, the king watched as the shore disappeared. According to contemporary sources, with tears in his eyes, he said, "Holy Land, I entrust you to God. May the Lord grant that I might return again to serve you." But Richard never returned. A year later, in 1193, Saladin died in Damascus. The era of the Third Crusade's greatest heroes had ended. If you enjoyed this epic story series from the world of the Crusader Wars, then click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Many more fascinating stories await us from the world of Richard and Saladin's legendary duels, and don't miss the next parts either. The war's legacy and impact. The battles of the Third Crusade were decisive not only militarily, but also culturally. Such mutual respect developed between Richard and Saladin that became a favorite theme of medieval literature. Contemporary Arab sources wrote admiringly of Richard. Ibn al-Athir writes, "The world has never seen such a warrior king as King Richard. If he had been master of war, he could have driven us from all of Syria and Egypt." Western sources spoke similarly admiringly of Saladin. Contemporary Latin chronicles wrote of his nobility and chivalrous behavior, which was a revolutionary change, since previously Muslims had only been called pagan barbarians. This mutual respect remained as a legacy for posterity. In later European literature, Saladin appears as a noble pagan who can serve as an example even to Christian knights. In Dante's Divine Comedy, Saladin is placed among the virtuous pagans, not in the depths of hell. Richard became the archetype of the chivalrous king, although he spent most of his reign not in England but fighting. His image merged with chivalric ideals. In the Robin Hood legends too, he is the true king to whom the hero remains loyal. But the war's true legacy was that it showed neither the Christian nor the Muslim side could totally triumph over the other. After the Treaty of Jaffa, the Holy Land remained divided. The Crusaders kept the coast, the Muslims the interior territories. This balance lasted for nearly a century. The military innovations were also significant. Richard demonstrated that the combination of disciplined infantry and crossbowmen could stop heavy cavalry. This tactic later spread in Europe too. Saladin proved that with expert use of light cavalry and archers, even the largest heavily armored army could be exhausted. Personal dramas. The 3-year war brought not only military, but also human dramas. King Richard, who lived his life in battle, was nonetheless forced to renounce most of his dreams. In his letters to his brother, he wrote, I return home like one who set out to conquer the world, but ultimately returns with only a small piece of coastline. King Guy de Lusignan of Jerusalem lost his crown but received rule over Cyprus. This ultimately proved a better decision for him, and for the Crusader states, because Cyprus was more stable and defensible than the continental possessions in the Holy Land. Saladin died in glory, but his empire was divided among 3 sons. The unity he had created for the Muslim world again fell apart with his death. According to sources, his last words were, "Not a single dinar remains after me in the imperial treasury. I distributed everything as alms among the poor." The heroic age of war ended, but its legends gained eternal life. The duel between Richard the Lionheart and Saladin became such a myth that survived the centuries and still today inspires writers, directors, and history lovers throughout the world. Such was the world of the Third Crusade's greatest battles, full of heroism, tragedy, and moments that forever changed history. If you enjoyed this detailed journey into the world of medieval warfare, click the like button, share it with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe. In the next video, we'll talk about the legendary sieges and heroes of the First Crusade. See you next time too, and together, let's continue discovering the world of great historical adventures.